should I start with kind of like a quick history on my Elden Ring experience? Like, do we want any kind of backstory here on
Oh,
this?
go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I'll start with the Soul series in general. I started playing technically Kingsfield 4 was my first FromSoft game.
Nice.
Um, yeah. Yeah, and that was my first time experiencing like killing an NPC and realizing that they don't come back. And it was on accident too. It was like this girl, and I think she had a dog from what I remember, and she like the dog was like mad at me for killing the girl and attacked or whatever. But I don't know, that kind of like hit different, because it was like my first time in a game where I like regretted something and felt bad.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what made like the dark fantasy genre like special to me. And Dark Souls came out, and obviously started playing that and got through my first time, and like anyone who plays Dark Souls and beats it, it's just that rewarding feeling and you just want to do it again. So I calculated a way that I could experience it again for the first time. So I started off trying to do like I pick a class. So I chose Wanderer and I wasn't gonna change anything, upgrade anything, try to just go base Wanderer class. And that kicked my butt. It was way too hard. Um, there was just so little I could do without upgrading, and I was still pretty new at the game. It was my second run, so I reevaluated what I wanted to do where it was still restrictive, and I was like, okay, well, I'll pick the lowest level class I can, and I'll see how much I can upgrade stuff, get out there and do it. So I ended up doing a level 1 run. I restricted myself to like melee only and all that, so because I like to immerse, I like to feel like a weak being that's overcoming insurmountable challenges. It's fun.
Yes.
Um, and I ended up doing that. That was my first like level 1 challenge, and that was pretty close to the time of release. Um, so since then, I've made it kind of a habit to like, do level 1 runs on any type of Souls game. So Dark Souls 2 did that. Code Vein, Neo, stuff like that. But since Dark Souls 3, I started doing them like for my first run as level 1, so that way I can like have that immersion. I can feel that challenge because like everybody plays the game the normal way, right? So to kind of keep it feeling fresh for me, so it's not just like going in there and kicking everything's butt,
Mm-hmm.
I just have my own way of gauging it for myself, and that's usually level 1. And it works with most games, and then there's some like Code Vein where it gets pretty rough because the game's not very good. It is for the most part, but that's a whole nother story.
Hmm.
Um, and then Elden Ring comes around, and I did the same thing. So I'm sure people can imagine as a level 1 going through Elden Ring, it presents challenges, some that people don't really expect. And it started off a wonderful adventure, tons of new stuff to see. It was wonderful. It was just a world of discovery, and I was completely enthralled. I loved it, every single moment. I loved creating my character. I loved the first experiences, just going out into the world and meticulously picking it apart. And I really had no complaints to start until I started going through and trying to 100% everything within everything up to the capital. And that's when I started, noticing repeat bosses and stuff, which didn't bother me that much because it wasn't too bad. Some of them were a little bad, but they were so easy it didn't really bother me. Like the tree spirit, I think it is, or not the tree spirit. The one that's pretty much Asylum Demon. That one's all over the place, but it wasn't a problem. So once I had gotten to the capital, that was a fresh experience. Everything in the capital was new and fun, and I was like, man, this is really exciting. I'm digging this again because I had some rough points on my way there, where it was just kind of redundant, and I was fighting like triple Crystallion. That was a nightmare. Um, but then I finally get there, do the capital, defeat Morgott, and it was the worst experience I'd ever had in a Souls game from then forward. It was just there was nothing new. There's like around 8 or 9 like new faces that you meet, new enemies. That's including bosses, and that's it. Everything else is just repeat reskins with massive AoEs stacked on top. And that was over half of my experience was post Capital. because there were so many bosses that were just ridiculous ganks, uh, cheesy AoE spamming enemies, like every enemy that you had fought before, but this time with an AoE or a roar. And I ended up spending so much time fighting like that black bird thing, whatever, and the frost dragon, uh, Godskin duo in the Spirit Caller cave. And by the time I actually got to the Godskin duo, I had fought them each 3 times each, right? So when I came to this battle, I was like, are you serious? This is real. I have to fight them again. And then they came back to life. So I didn't like Godskin duo at first, not even a little bit. In fact, it was the one fight where I just decided to cheese it kind of. Still partook in the fight. It was clear I knew what I was doing, but I was using sleep. So is what it is. But I don't know. I did not have a good thing with Elden Ring. It was just too much. I'd spend too much time grinding just the same things over and over where I'm like, okay, now I'm fighting this boss again, and I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't
Hmm.
wasn't fun by that point. But once I got to the end, I got to Melania, and the area before Melania was awful. It was making me really dislike the game, and it was really bringing me down because it was just so full of tons of enemies slammed together, bosses being reused, thrown around the levels, um, just tons of really cheap enemies and encounters where there's very little thought put into it. And it was clearly balanced around, high level characters, which I would say is normal, but it's not for a FromSoft game. They're always very careful about their enemy placement, making sure that challenges can be overcome by any means. And they still could, but not without extreme amounts of time invested, and it just wasn't worth it. And I don't know. I got to Melania, and at first I was like, kind of excited, and it wasn't until people started like joining the stream and like kind of cheering me on where I was like getting back into it, and then I ended up really enjoying Melania. Um, took a few days to like take her out that way because I had no clue what any of her mechanics were, and I had to figure it out myself. And the only thing I could really say that I hate about Melania is waterfowl, because it's bad. It really is.
Hmm.
And some of her mechanics, her stagger mechanics, I was fooled into thinking that if you parried her 3 times and got the riposte, it would reset the stagger buildup, which was false. But because, well, I had tested it, so I got her to the point where she would stagger and then staggered her, right? And I had found a consistent timing for that. So I was like, okay. So I started incorporating parrying, and I noticed I didn't get a stagger a couple times with like the same timing, but it turns out it was because I was getting a stagger during hyper armor frames or something. I don't know. Where she couldn't be staggered, right? It was not possible. She's the only enemy in the game, right? In all of them, where she gets immunity from that. So it was just kind of goofy, and I ended up going a very long time thinking that I had to either parry or stagger or alternate between them entirely. And it just kind of like broke up the flow of the fight because I tried to get like a really intimate, like toe-to-toe fight with her, which I did. I ended up getting a pretty good one, but
Hmm.
um, I don't know. I ended up also using Bloodhound Step for waterfowl, which at the time was fine, but it got me a lot of like hate for it, where people thought it was like a bad kill because I used Bloodhound Step for that move. And I also used Cold and Bleed on my single katana. I wasn't dual wielding, so I didn't feel like it was cheap, but it still didn't matter. I don't know. It was a rough experience. I did enjoy the fight, but just like the backlash I'd get on things for doing things blind, right? It just kind of felt defeating. And then I gave PvP a go, and that ended up being kind of the same experience where it was just not what it used to be. It was just a whole bunch of like unbalanced stuff, a whole bunch of in-game skill over player skill kind of balancing where you could easily get overtaken by something that you had no real way of avoiding. Like you could get checkmated really easy.
Hmm.
And I feel that way about the bosses too. But there was a lot of good in there, trickled in between. And Millennia did end up being a good thing ultimately, despite kind of the negative response I got from it after the first like week. But I don't know. It actually destroyed gaming for me for a while, Elden Ring did, where I didn't enjoy games anymore. There was no satisfaction in them. I'd turn on a game and just not even feel it, just wouldn't excite me at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, it completely destroyed it. So I ended up getting into other things altogether. I got into like music production and stuff and just started finding other things that I enjoyed because of Elden Ring, which is wild because I loved the Dark Souls games and I still to this day love Elden Ring. I ended up a few weeks, it might have been a month or something after I'd like quit playing it. I went back because of my friend Xeria and started playing it again. And did like a new save, started rushing to New Game 7 so I could do some of those kills and just try to have like fun with it again. And what I ended up finding was in that rush to New Game 7, I was riding my horse for 10 minutes, running through, grabbing an item, riding my horse for 10 minutes, grabbing something, killing a boss, riding my horse for 10 minutes, and it was just this back and forth where I was just riding my horse, killing essential bosses, pushing forward. And that was it. There was like no incentive to do anything else. The bosses that I had to fight were not the good ones. Some of them were like Margit, Morgott. Uh, it's there's a few others here and there like Malekith and everything, but didn't enjoy it. By the last new game cycle, I got pretty proficient at it where I was just breezing through it, but I still didn't enjoy it. It was mostly riding my horse, going through these boring environments where there's nothing to interact with like there is in Dark Souls. Like
Mm-hmm.
in Dark Souls, every level is handcrafted. You go through it, you're encountering every enemy, you're not riding past them on your horse. Like it's nice to look at a vista, but the vista is not going to keep your attention for the entirety of the game, right? It's just there to give context to everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Dark Souls, you have these vistas and it gives context, but then you have this whole interconnected world to play in while you're there, right? Elden Ring, it doesn't feel like that. It's like you're just wasting time watching yourself ride across a field, which can be fun, um, to get to the next place that's interesting. And really, it's not the combat encounters, which it should be. Dark Souls has always been really fun for like the combat encounters, and this time around, it feels like ultimately you're trying to avoid them or fight when you have to. And I tried to encounter everything. I tried to fight everything because it's how I play the games, but once I had done it once, I had no desire to do it again. It just didn't feel like the old games where I could like take on a group of enemies and I don't know, make it fun, where it's not just like using big skills to take them all down at once.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, wasn't the same kind of experience for me. And with backstabs being nerfed in the beginning, it was really hard to deal with groups like in a higher skill way where it didn't feel like just, spacing in R1s. So I kind of lost interest pretty quick. I ended up going back and playing some Dark Souls 2.
Thank you for listening to this podcast clip. If you want to watch more of the podcast, the full podcast is in the link in the description, along with my guest channel name. And if you would like to guest in a future podcast, please contact me and we shall talk so we can discuss many, many topics, more to come. Other than that, have a glorious day.